Greetings, Com 600. This is Ben Frazier. Hope you're having a good week and keeping up on your reading of Nikolai's The Question of God, where he pits Lewis's revelation and view of Christianity worldview against the worldview of the science worldview of Freud. And I think it's a very interesting book, interesting insight into the lives of these two men, as well as the view of the world that they each have. Before I get into talking about that book, I'd like to first talk a little bit about worldview. As I said last week, it's a rather messy concept. It's a difficult concept, not easily dealt with, and partly because we don't necessarily sit down and think our way into a worldview, choosing our ideas and that sort of thing. But for the most part, we experience them through story and through our culture, the stories that our parents or our family or community, or in today's world, a lot of it comes through the mass media and the technology. As more and more time is given over to that in people's lives, and particularly children's lives, they pick up a worldview that isn't always the kind that they're shared within the family. So I want just to look at a little bit what is a worldview, and begin. Then we can begin to see where it comes from. James Sire's definition of a worldview in the book he's written, The Universe Next Door, is probably one very good worldview. It says this: a worldview is a commitment, a fundamental orientation of the heart that can be expressed as a story or as a set of presuppositions, assumptions that may be true, partially true, or entirely false, which we hold consciously or subconsciously, consistently or inconsistently, about the basic construction of reality, how we think then the world works. What is the basics of reality? And he says those ideas form the foundation of any life. In other words, for us to move through life, to think about life, to behave in life, we have to have some concept of what that life is. And that is sort of what the worldview is. But as you can see, we don't always hold it consistently. It's not always rational, because a lot of times it's felt, and we come into it through experience, and we come in through it through stories, and those stories come at us in this particular age, in this particular world, in so many different ways. So we pick up ideas of worldview through many, many sources, and each person's worldview, each person's understanding of how the reality of the world works, comes from a variety of sources. A couple other things that I want us to understand. By no means will the Christian view of things always differ from other people's worldview. So we have some things that are particular to Christianity. True. Yes, we do. Life, death, resurrection of Jesus Christ, for example. But there are other kinds of things about worldview that comes and that we share with others living in our world. And we shouldn't be surprised by that. God made us all in His image, and we all have to function and live within our world. Secondly, it is not the case that there is just one Christian worldview, because there's many particular things that make up a Christian worldview. And now, there is a core that all Christians share, of course. Yes, I believe that most people do. But as you move further out from that core, there are differences, and we notice this in different denominations. We notice this in different communities of Christian faith, how we experience that, how we articulate it, even some of the doctrines change. A core belief. That's why I really like Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. He tries not to get in those areas where we differ, but into those areas where we are very, very similar. And so we have to be careful in speaking about the worldview as if there is only one. Arthur Holmes states that there is a human need for a worldview. And he says the need for this is fourfold. First, there's a need to unify thought and life. We have to move, we have to think, we have to behave in this world. And in order to do that, we have to make some sense out of it. And so he says there's needs to be some unity of thought and life. He says, second, a person needs to define the good life. What does a good life look like? And find hope and meaning in life. And of course, you and I as Christians know that there are so many different. We have materialism is one whole worldview that emphasizes material things, capitalism, also socialism, and other kinds of major isms that have with them building parts of a worldview. He says, secondly, we need to guide our thought and we need to guide our actions. So there are those four things: unity of thought, definition of the good life, guiding our thought, and guiding our action. Let me just say that I really appreciate that Holmes is talking about here, because a lot of times we think if I just believe the right things, I'll do them. But there's a great gulf between actually believing something, actually knowing something, and actually living it or doing it. And we, as Christians, sometimes are guilty of underplaying the distance between that. If we can just get somebody to say these special words or to articulate this thought, then somehow the behavior will follow it. But that is not always true. A couple of other thoughts. One is that sometimes we use the word humanism. And I'd like to say that there are actually two very different kinds of humanism. One is theistic humanism. And that idea and that type of humanism is nourished by the Reformation that stresses individualism and the cultural mandate, that we have a part of creating a culture for people to live within. There is that sacramental view of nature and human existence that comes primarily in the Catholic Church, and you can also see it in the Anglican Church and to some extent in the Reformed Church and other churches like that. So we need to be aware that there is that theistic worldview, but there's also a naturalistic worldview that's nurtured primarily by the scientific mentality and the Enlightenment. Deism would be an example of that, sort of that evolutionary naturalism that comes out. And so we see these two concepts of worldview. So if you hear some Christians talking about humanism, you have to understand, what are they talking about, the naturalistic humanism or the theistic humanism? Naturalistic humanism, of course, rejects the supernatural worldview, and it values man and what man humans are being and doing and finding worthwhile experience, and ignoring the spiritual part, and I think to their detriment. Now, one other thing that I'd like to share with you, and this comes again from James Sire's book, The Universe Next Door. First, he says that there are two branches of philosophy that nurture worldview. One is metaphysics, and that is the study of being, what it means to be. But he says also there's the study of epistemology, of knowing what constitutes good evidence. How can we know something? And he goes on to say that there are seven basic questions that help us understand and dissect a person's worldview. And he says that's another good way of looking at and understanding worldview. So let me just quickly go over those seven questions that he has. And let me say his book, The Universe Next Door, is a great book to use and read. I used to have it for this class. I found that really his first 20 pages, the whole book is really condensed and the main thoughts are right in there. And I'm going to give you the main questions that he asks. But if you want to read more in this area, then that would be a good book to read. The first question, what is primary reality? What is the really real? And so he's asking those, what really constitutes reality for us? Does it include supernatural? Does it just include the natural? Those kinds of things. What is the nature of external reality. Is the world created, or is it autonomous, or is it chaotic, or is it orderly? These are the kinds of questions that you would bring to that. What is the nature of external reality? Third question is, what is a human being? And by this, is this human being thought more of a machine, or is he thought more of as a spiritual a being, or as a natural being, or those kinds of things? So what does it mean to be human? And we need to look at those questions. What happens to a person after death, or at death? That's another sort of question that will help us understand our own worldview or someone else's worldview. Why is it possible, writes Jamie Smith, to know anything at all? Why is it possible to know anything at all? Are we made, we're not all-knowing beings like God. So how then can we know? How are we made in God's image? How do we know what is right and what is wrong? So this is the ethic or moral question. And so again, we see here, made in the image of God, whose character is good, so therefore we need to know what is good. And Lewis, in The Abolition of Man, addresses this question very astutely, in my opinion, and I would really recommend looking at that book if you wanted to read a little bit more in that area. And then finally, what is the meaning of human history? Where are we going? What are we doing? Is God doing something? And of course, different worldviews would address those questions differently. Okay, so as you read this book this week, I want you to begin to think of some of those questions and begin to look at how these worldviews were formed by these two men, partly by the experience of their lives, partly by the ideas of the academy as they encountered them, partly also by what they read. As Lewis said, I had to be very careful about what I read because all the authors conspired against me to bring him, in this case, to Christianity. So I hope you're enjoying the reading. I hope this helps a little bit in terms of what worldview is and where we're going. As I said, it's messy. One of the things I want us to do as we move through this semester is to begin to think at our own worldview. What has contributed to our understanding of the reality and the world we live in and how we know, and some of these other questions. The church, certainly, the family, yes, but also the media, and sometimes those places that we least expected, those stories that just seem so innocent and entertaining, are actually, over time, really influencing us. All right, God bless you. I hope you have a good week, and I'll see you again next week. Thanks, bye.